I started out today not intending on making a video, or rather, not specifically. I started out by dropping off some footage downtown to a friend, a music video that I just filmed. When I finished the transfer, I stepped outside and it looked rather nice, nicer than it had looked in quite some time. The camera I was carrying was my Fujifilm X-T5, and I had a couple of lenses with me. The first lens I had was one I got recently and have been meaning to make a video on. However, after the first few photos, it didn't feel like the conditions suited the lens. So, I decided I'd go with something more reliable, more normal. I brought out my Fujifilm 35mm f2, and I started walking around. I decided to give myself a bit of a challenge. I decided that I was going to shoot from the hip, and from the hip only. And only looking down at the monitor to frame if I was waiting for a shot. This isn't too far off from how I take a lot of my photos. I don't always use the viewfinder. I have a videography and filmmaking background, so a lot of the time you don't even have a viewfinder, you're always looking at a monitor. So it's a little bit of that. However, sometimes I wasn't even looking at the monitor at all. I would see something coming, someone walking down the street, and I would just snap a picture, hoping for the best. I have history with using different cameras that have faster, more reliable autofocus. However, today I decided that I wanted to try out the Fujifilm continuous autofocus. Since the X-T5 is a very modern camera, I figured it would hold up okay. And for the most part it did. And sometimes I missed. Sometimes the subject's eyes were closed, or they were looking the other way. Since I was not able to see the photo when I took it, you don't know what you're going to get. Some people may argue that shooting from the hip is a more pure form of street photography, more akin to shooting with film, in that you don't always know what you're going to get until you develop the photo. And this was similar to that. However, I did have the opportunity to stop and sometimes take a look at the photos that I took. And I really think a lot of them turned out. There were times when I was messing around and they were very out of focus, or blurry, or poorly framed. But overall, it was a nice challenge, and I think it's something that I might consider more often. However, when you're shooting with a lens that is longer than a typical street photography lens, you're more often going to miss your subject, or your frame isn't going to be really what you intended. So the next time I do something like this, I would probably go with a 28 or maybe a 35mm field of view, just for that little safety net around the outside of my frame. I think in challenging myself to shoot only from the hip, I was more conscious of the photos that I wanted to get, so I got a higher yield than maybe if I was spraying and praying, as a lot of photographers seem to do on the street. A lot of the times when I'm watching other photographers, I see them have a higher drive mode. They may take 3 or 4 photos per subject, maybe upwards of 10. And not that I think that is a bad way to get the shot that you want. I feel like you don't often enough get to see their misses. So, because of that, I'm going to include some of the photos that I missed. Not every photography day is going to be a perfect photography day, but you wouldn't know until you tried. You can't always wait for the right conditions. You can't always expect to have a great yield, but as long as you go out there and try and take photos, you're going to get something that you like. Eventually. Part of the charm of shooting from the hip and not using your viewfinder is that you can trick yourself into taking a shot that you might not have otherwise taken if you were looking through a viewfinder. You may find more interesting compositions or leave headroom where you normally wouldn't leave headroom. Maybe you cut off a subject partially, and that's interesting. Maybe you get more headroom than you normally would, and that inspires you for the next time to go out and look for that. Try to achieve that outcome. You may find that you prefer to shoot lower. For me, I'm quite tall, and a lot of the time when I look through the eyepiece and I'm looking to a subject, subjects are often shorter than me, so I either have to crouch down or I bring the camera down to my chest or waistline. In shooting from the hip, I didn't have the limitations of my own height, and I didn't have to look like I was taking photos all the time. The practice of shooting from the hip allowed me to not really think about the camera, and more so think about the photos in my head as they were coming up. I could be prepared in my head and in my mind, and then fire away from my waist and hope for the best. Doing that allowed me to have some more curious or interesting compositions that I may not have otherwise gotten if I was looking through an eyepiece. And subjects may notice that I have a camera up to my face when they're less likely to see the one hanging around my neck or attached to my wrist strap. Today is one of those videos where I don't specifically have a moral, or I don't specifically have something philosophical or psychological to discuss, but more so, I like looking at this as a way of experimenting and challenging myself for different outcomes than I otherwise would have had if I performed in my usual manner. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this, ones where I challenge myself to do a specific task, let me know in the comments. And if you have any ideas of your own of what I should do for a challenge, please let me know. I want to say thank you for coming along, and until next time, adios.